Toussaint Louverture was born a slave and died more dangerous than an army. This story was never meant to be told. Saint-Domingue, 1791, the most profitable slave colony on earth. By the late 18th century, nearly half of the sugar consumed in Europe and most of its coffee came from this single island. From a distance, it looked like prosperity. Up close, it was a graveyard that never rested. More than 500,000 enslaved Africans worked the plantations. They were outnumbering the white population 10-1, yet they owned nothing. Not their labor, not their children, not even their names. They slept packed into filthy huts, breathing the same air as disease and insects. Food was scarce, punishment was constant, whippings were public, meant to teach lessons. Executions were spectacles, meant to erase hope. The average enslaved worker did not live long enough to grow old. Most were worked until their bodies failed, then replaced like broken tools. This was not cruelty born of hatred alone. It was efficiency. It was into this world, around 1743, that Toussaint was born on the Breda plantation, just outside Cap Français. He was born enslaved, not captured later, not transported across the ocean in chains. He opened his eyes already owned. His father, Gao-Guinou, was believed to have been a man of status in West Africa before enslavement, a quiet inheritance Toussaint carried without ever speaking of it. Unlike most enslaved men, Toussaint grew over the years and was assigned to work with horses and livestock rather than the cane fields. It spared him the worst physical destruction, but more importantly, it placed him close to the machinery of the plantation, how food moved, how animals were managed, how discipline was enforced. It also gave him something rare: moments of time. On the Breda plantation, Toussaint was allowed limited access to books, partly because he was trusted, partly because no one believed knowledge could turn into a weapon in the hands of a slave. He taught himself to read. After exhausting days of labor, he studied by candlelight Catholic texts, medical manuals, histories of ancient generals, and the writings of Enlightenment thinkers who spoke boldly about liberty and natural rights, never imagining those words would be read in a slave hut. Toussaint was not educated because he was chosen. He became formidable because he refused to remain ignorant. He listened more than he spoke. He observed patterns. He learned how systems sustained themselves and where they broke. In these years, Toussaint married Suzanne Simone Baptiste, an enslaved woman from a nearby plantation. Their life together was modest and fragile, built under the constant threat of separation or sale. They had children knowing full well that family meant vulnerability in a world designed to destroy it. Love in Saint-Domingue was not safety, it was risk. And Toussaint understood exactly what he stood to lose. By 1791, the colony was already cracking. The ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, had crossed the ocean only for white planters and free men of color. The enslaved majority heard the words and recognized the lie. In August of that year, a voodoo ceremony in the northern plains, led by an enslaved man named Duddy Bookman, ignited what decades of brutality had prepared. Plantations burned through the night. Masters were killed or fled. For the first time, the enslaved were not running, they were advancing. Toussaint did not rush into the uprising. While others charged forward driven by rage, he treated the wounded, gathered information, and watched rebel leaders die from poor strategy and fractured leadership. He saw that fury alone would lead only to massacre. The revolt would fail unless it was disciplined, unless someone transformed chaos into command. When Toussaint finally chose war, it was not out of impulse or revenge. It was calculation. He understood that stepping into the revolution meant more than risking his own life. It meant placing Suzanne, his children, and everything he had built onto a path with no return. From that moment on, Toussaint Louverture was no longer simply trying to survive the system. He was preparing to dismantle it. When Toussaint Louverture entered the revolution, Saint-Domingue was already drowning in blood. The initial uprising had shattered plantations but failed to build order. Enslaved fighters moved in scattered bands, driven by vengeance more than strategy. Leaders rose quickly and died just as fast. European powers watched closely, waiting for the island to collapse so they could carve it apart. Toussaint saw opportunity in that disorder. He began not by shouting commands, but by organizing. He imposed discipline where there had been none, forbidding looting, enforcing hierarchy, and demanding obedience even from men who had never known restraint without violence. Former slaves became soldiers, not mobs, units. He trained them to march, to hold positions, to retreat when necessary. Many resisted his authority at first. Toussaint answered not with cruelty, but with results. At first, he aligned himself with Spain, which controlled the neighboring colony of Saint-Domingue. Spain promised freedom to enslaved men who fought against France, and Toussaint used that alliance to gain weapons, experience, and rank. He learned European warfare from the inside, how officers thought, how supply lines mattered more than bravery, how timing decided battles long before the first shot was fired. By the mid-1890s, Toussaint Louverture was no longer just a commander, he was a force. His troops defeated French Republican armies, then turned back British invasions that had already swallowed much of the Caribbean. British generals underestimated him. They saw a former slave. They did not see the mind behind the movement until it was too late. Yellow fever destroyed their ranks. Toussaint destroyed what remained. In 1794, France abolished slavery across its colonies. Overnight, the war changed shape. Toussaint switched allegiance, turning his seasoned army against Spain and Britain in the name of the French Republic. It was a decision driven not by loyalty, but by calculation. France offered legal abolition. The others did not. Victory followed victory. By 1798, British forces withdrew from Saint-Domingue entirely. Spanish control collapsed soon after. Toussaint Louverture emerged as the undisputed military authority on the island. Power changed him, not into a tyrant, but into something more unsettling. He understood that freedom without structure would invite reconquest. Plantations were reopened, not with chains, but with compulsory paid labor. Soldiers enforced production. Order returned, but it was rigid, uncompromising. Many who had dreamed of liberation struggled under the weight of Toussaint's discipline. He ruled like a man who believed chaos would destroy everything he had fought for. In 1801, Toussaint formalized what had already become reality. He issued a constitution naming himself governor for life. Slavery was permanently abolished. Racial equality was declared law. Saint-Domingue would govern itself, though still nominally under France. Across the Atlantic, Napoleon Bonaparte read the document in silence. Toussaint had not declared independence. He believed he was being careful. Napoleon believed he was being challenged. And in that misunderstanding, the fate of Toussaint Louverture was sealed. Napoleon Bonaparte did not see Saint-Domingue as a symbol. He saw it as property. Sugar meant money, control meant power. And Toussaint Louverture, black, autonomous, celebrated, was a precedent that threatened every empire built on slavery. In 1802, Napoleon sent a massive expedition to the island under his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc. Officially, they came to restore French authority. Unofficially, they came to remove Toussaint. At first, Toussaint fought. His generals knew the terrain. His soldiers were seasoned, but France brought numbers, deception, and promises of peace. Leclerc swore that slavery would never be restored. Toussaint, exhausted by years of war and desperate to spare the island another bloodshed, chose negotiation over annihilation. It was the decision that ended him. During a supposed peace meeting, Toussaint was arrested. No trial, no resistance. He was shackled, placed on a ship, and sent to France in secrecy, cut away from the land, the people, and the cause that had defined his life. His wife, Suzanne Simone Baptiste, and their children were arrested as well. They were separated, imprisoned, and deported. The revolution did not only take Toussaint's power, it took his family. Toussaint was imprisoned at Fort de Joux, high in the Jura Mountains. The cell was cold, stone, and silent. Food was rationed, heat was withheld, letters went unanswered. The man who outmaneuvered empires was left to disappear slowly. He died there in April 1903. Napoleon believed the problem was solved. He was wrong. Back in Saint-Domingue, Toussaint's generals, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, and Alexandre Pétion, continued the war. When the French reintroduced slavery, any remaining illusion collapsed. Disease devastated French troops. Resistance hardened into annihilation. On January 1st, 1804, the colony declared independence. It renamed itself Haiti. The first black republic in the modern world was born from the movement Toussaint Louverture had shaped, but did not live to see. In overthrowing him, France had cut down only the trunk. The roots remained.